They say the quietest trails are the ones that remember, and sometimes they remember you. My name's Evan Mercer, 42 years old, born and raised in Helena, Montana. I've spent most of my life out here, logging roads, Forest Service paths, forgotten ranger routes, the kind of places the park maps don't bother to print anymore. I travel full-time in my RV, a 1998 Winnebago Brave I restored after my divorce. It's the one place that feels truly mine, a small, humming metal home against the wilderness. And though I tell myself I'm out here for peace, the truth is I've been chasing something darker, understanding why the woods change when people vanish inside them. This story isn't just one encounter. It's three. 3 times the wilderness tested me. Not with cliffs or bears, but with something much older, something in the silence itself. I never set out to find fear. I just followed the trails that everyone else had forgotten. The first happened up near Granite Peak, early May. The snow had just started melting, and the roads were slush. That strange, half-dead season when everything smells of thawed rot and pine. I'd parked my RV near an old trailhead that the ranger had told me was technically closed, but he smiled when he said it, like that word didn't really mean anything out there. I hiked in for maybe 5 miles before I saw the bridge, a rotted wooden structure hanging over a narrow gorge. The boards had warped like they were breathing. On the far side, there was a weathered sign, half fallen, covered in moss. Bear Creek Trail, Est Te 1912. I'd read about it online. Used to be a postal trail between cabins, then got abandoned after a mudslide. Locals said you could still see pieces of the old mule line if you looked hard enough. I crossed the bridge anyway. The forest on the other side felt heavier. It's strange, the air changes first, like static before lightning. The smell of cold water and something faintly metallic. The trees there didn't creak or sway. They listened. Every footstep echoed softer than it should, and by the 3rd mile, I started realizing I couldn't hear my own breathing the way I should. Then I saw the rope. At first, I thought it was just a deadfall branch, but it was knotted, hanging from a limb maybe 20 feet up, frayed and darkened like it had been left decades ago. Below it, a small fire pit filled with black ash and a circle of rusted cans. Someone had camped here. But the rope didn't look like something you'd hang gear from. It looked like something you'd hang yourself from. I remember staring at it, my pack still on my shoulders, wind picking up just enough to make the rope sway. That faint creak, wood on wood, it made my stomach twist. I took out my phone, but the screen flickered like the signal was being swallowed. No bars, not even the usual SOS network. And then, I swear to God, I heard a whistle. Not birdsong. Not the wind. A whistle, low and deliberate, coming from deeper in the trail. Just 3 notes. A sound humans make when they're trying to find each other in the dark. I called out, "Hey!" But the moment I did, the air fell still again. I don't know what made me stay. Maybe pride. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the same thing that draws people too close to the edge just to see what it feels like. I took 5 steps toward where I thought the sound came from. The ground dipped slightly, and my boot caught on something. I looked down, a loop of thin wire, rusted, half buried in leaves. It was a snare, a damn animal trap. My stomach dropped when I saw another one, then another. All half collapsed, all old, but still set in a perfect line leading deeper down the trail. That's when I realized someone had been using this path long after it was abandoned. The whistle came again, this time closer, clearer. But it wasn't behind me, it was above. I looked up, scanning the canopy, and for a split second I saw something, a flash of gray fabric, a hand, maybe? No. I blinked and it was gone. Just pine needles drifting, but the rope was still swaying. I don't remember turning around. One moment I was staring into the trees, the next I was halfway back to the bridge, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. When I reached the other side, I didn't stop. I practically ran the last 2 miles, lungs burning, until I could see my RV glinting through the trees. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, I'd glance through the blinds, half expecting to see someone or something standing out there near the tree line. Around midnight, I stepped outside just to prove to myself I wasn't being ridiculous. The forest was silent again, not peaceful, just muted. And then, faintly, far off in the dark, that whistle came again. 3 notes. Slow, patient. That was the first time I felt the woods look back. The second encounter happened a year later in Utah's Escalante region. I'd driven out there chasing the promise of wide red canyons and solitude, the kind of silence that resets you. I'd heard of a side route called the Anasazi Spur, named after the ancient cliff dwellers. The locals warned me the trail didn't exist anymore. Flash floods had eaten most of it. But I found an old topographic map online and curiosity won again. I parked near the canyon rim, left my RV tucked between 2 cottonwoods, and started the descent. The air was dry and electric, carrying that mineral smell of dust and lightning. I hiked down into the gorge until the walls turned to streaked sandstone, layered like old skin. About halfway in, I started seeing handprints. Not cave art, real, recent handprints, smudged into the sand, leading along the rock face. Some small, some large, like a family walking hand in hand. Except the stride wasn't right. The spacing between the prints, it didn't make sense. At first I thought maybe it was just runoff marks or some weird trick of erosion. But as the trail narrowed into a shaded section, the prints deepened, pressed into the sand as if someone had crawled there on all fours. The silence here wasn't just absence of sound. It was vacuum. Even my heartbeat felt quieter, like the canyon itself was swallowing noise. I turned back then. I don't know why. Some instinct I can't explain. And when I did, I noticed something new on the canyon wall. Faint, chalky white markings stretched high above my head. Shapes like eyes, layered over each other, and below them, scratched into the rock at eye level, a single line of words: "We are not done with the hands." I didn't wait to find out what that meant. I climbed back toward daylight, shaking, the air growing hotter and thinner with every step. But when I reached the rim, there were handprints again, this time on my RV's door. Pale dust smeared like someone had touched it with damp clay. No footprints. I wiped them off. I told myself they must have been mine from earlier, even though I knew I hadn't touched that door with my bare hands. That night, I kept the engine running until the first hint of dawn burned the cliffs pink. Then I drove west, windows down, until the desert air stopped feeling alive. I thought that was the end of it. But these trails, they don't just end. They wait. The third time, I should have known better. It was autumn, 2 years later, up in northern Washington, near the foothills of the North Cascades. The leaves were starting to go orange and copper, that perfect shoulder season when the tourists thin out, but the air still carries the last traces of warmth. I'd been following a collection of online forums for RV boondockers, and someone mentioned a spot called Grove Hollow Trail, supposedly an old service route that hadn't been maintained since the late 80s. There weren't many details, just a few cryptic posts. Stay off after dusk, don't use the fire ring, the path moves when you sleep. I thought it was local folklore. But sometimes the way curiosity gets its hooks in you, it feels like gravity. The road up was brutal, steep switchbacks, washboard gravel, then a stretch so narrow my side mirror scraped the rock wall. When I finally reached the clearing, I felt an odd kind of peace. The trailhead sign was bleached blank. The trees were thick and old, their bark grown in twisted knots like arthritic fingers clutching at the light. I set up camp, folding chair, coffee pot, small fire ring. I told myself this was a rest stop, not an investigation. That first night, the forest felt calm, still, too still. No owls, no wind. Just the faint ticking of the RV cooling as the engine settled. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound, a deep rhythmic thud, spaced evenly apart, like footsteps but heavier. I sat up in bed and realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was beneath me. The RV creaked once, then again, something or someone was under the chassis. I grabbed my flashlight and my boots, my heart hammering so hard I thought the thing beneath me might hear it. When I stepped outside, the cold hit like a slap, wet earth and fog so dense my breath looked like smoke. I crouched, aimed the beam under the RV. Nothing, just dirt, a few hanging roots. The sound stopped the moment I looked. I stayed there, kneeling, waiting. Then I heard the second sound, a soft dragging like fabric sliding across metal. It came from behind the RV this time, toward the trail entrance. I followed it. The beam of my light caught a shape about 20 feet ahead, a pile of stones stacked waist high in the middle of the path, fresh, each rock smeared with what looked like mud, but darker. On top of the pile was a small object, a photograph. It was old, faded Polaroid edges, slightly curled. I picked it up. It showed a man standing next to an RV, smiling at the camera. Same model as mine, same year. Behind him, the same twisted trees. I turned it over, hands trembling. On the back, written in faint pencil, were 5 words: "You parked in the same spot." I dropped the photo and stumbled backward, my light shaking. The fog pressed closer now, swallowing the trail behind me. I ran, not back toward the RV, but down the narrow path leading deeper into the woods. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe instinct, maybe stupidity. But part of me couldn't stand the idea that something human had left that for me. The path wound down a small ravine, slippery with moss. That's when I saw them. More stone piles, each with something on top. A hat, a torn piece of flannel, a broken compass. Personal items, weathered but deliberate. I counted at least a dozen before I stopped, and then I realized they were spaced evenly apart, about the length of a stride. They formed a trail, leading to a clearing. When I stepped into that clearing, I felt my entire body tighten. There was a campsite there, or what was left of one, a collapsed tent, a burned-out fire ring, a rusted lantern lying on its side, half buried in leaves, and beside it, a logbook. The cover was soaked, but the pages inside were dry enough to read. The first entry was from 1993. The next few pages listed names, dates, and quick notes. Weather clear, saw elk tracks, staying 3 nights. Then the tone shifted. Open quote, "Something circling the RV. Sounds like dragging chain. Heard tapping on the tank at 2 a.m. Footprints appear when I'm inside. Don't follow the stones." Close quote. The last entry was a single line, written in shaky ink. Open quote, "The ground isn't empty." Close quote. That was enough. I ran back the way I came, the flashlight beam cutting through the fog like a blade. But the forest didn't look the same. The trail twisted wrong, trees crowding closer, paths splitting where there hadn't been any before. Every few seconds, I swore I saw movement in my peripheral vision, just enough to keep me running faster. When I finally broke through to my campsite, my RV door was wide open. I hadn't left it that way. The air inside was freezing, damp, like something had crawled in from the ground. I slammed the door, locked it, and turned the key in the ignition. The headlights illuminated the trees ahead, and for a second I saw something move between them. Not a person, not an animal. A shape that seemed to bend the air around it. Tall, stooped, like it didn't know which way gravity worked. Then the fog swallowed it whole. I drove. I didn't care that the road was narrow, didn't care that the tires skidded on mud. The woods thinned, the elevation dropped, and when I finally hit pavement again, I didn't stop until dawn. I checked under the RV later that morning at a rest stop, half convinced I'd find claw marks or drag lines, but there was nothing, except for a few stones, small ones, wedged in the undercarriage. I threw them into a river and kept driving. That's the thing about the forgotten trails. They don't stay forgotten. They keep their stories. They watch the ones who come to listen. For years after those encounters, I couldn't camp alone without feeling that faint hum beneath the soil, that pulse of something watching from below. But with time, I realized something else. It isn't just about fear. It's about attention. The wilderness doesn't haunt everyone. It chooses those who look too closely, those who listen for patterns that were never meant for human ears. I've met other travelers, other RVers who've had moments like mine, whispers through the trees, unmarked roads that seem to move when you return to them, half-remembered faces in trail cameras. We all say the same thing. The danger isn't getting lost. It's finding something that remembers you. And maybe that's the real lesson. Out here, solitude isn't empty. It's occupied. So if you ever find yourself deep in the woods, off the grid, off the map, and you come across a path with no footprints, or a sign too weathered to read, or a trail that doesn't appear on your GPS, don't follow it. And if you do, when you start hearing the whistle or see the handprints or feel the ground breathing beneath your RV, remember this voice, because the forgotten trails remember too, and some roads are better left untraveled. I still remember the first night I heard my name carried across the lake. It wasn't shouted, not even spoken. It was breathed. A whisper that slipped across the still surface of the water, threaded through the cold air, and touched the edge of my ear like a chill you can't shake off. My name is Eli Sanders, 37, part-time mechanic and full-time drifter, I guess. I'd been living out of my RV for almost 8 months by then, chasing quiet places where cell service didn't reach. Places where I could fish in peace, cook over a small fire, and pretend that the silence meant something other than loneliness. That's what brought me to Lake Diablo, up in the North Cascades of Washington. The name alone should have warned me, Diablo, but I'd never been one for superstition. I'd heard from a guy at a gas station in Concrete that there was a small hidden campground up there, free, no rangers, no tourists, just a few old boat ramps and the kind of still water that mirrors the mountains like glass. He said you could park right on the gravel shore and wake up to the fog rising off the lake like smoke. That was all I needed to hear. The drive up was long, cutting through switchbacks carved into steep granite walls. Pine and cedar crowded the road so close that branches scraped my side mirrors. It was late September, the air thin and cold, and a soft drizzle had been falling since I'd left the main highway. I liked it that way. Gray light, low clouds, the world reduced to muted shades of green and blue. By the time I reached the lake, the rain had stopped, and a wet hush hung over everything. The only sounds were the ticking of the RV engine cooling down and the faint creak of trees shifting in the wind. I parked at the farthest spot, a slanted stretch of gravel near an old concrete ramp that led into the water. The lake stretched out in front of me, dark and unmoving, framed by peaks whose tops were hidden in fog. There were a few other campers scattered along the shore, rusted trailers, one pickup with a canopy, and a faded blue van that looked abandoned. The people I did see kept to themselves. A man with a long gray beard walked his dog along the shore, but he never looked up when I waved. That first evening was calm. I set up my little fire pit beside the RV and watched the lake darken as night came on. I could smell wet pine, damp earth, and the faint metallic scent of the water. Somewhere across the lake, an owl called, low and steady, and the sound echoed longer than it should have. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, how utterly quiet. When the whisper came, I thought it was wind, just a slip of sound, but the lake was still, like polished stone. I'd been halfway through a beer, sitting in my camp chair, when I heard it again, closer this time. Eli. I froze. The word was stretched out, soft and wet, like someone calling underwater. My name, clear but wrong, as if the vowels had been twisted just slightly. I turned toward the water, expecting to see someone, maybe a prankster in a kayak, but the lake was empty. My breath fogged in the cold, and I felt that familiar tingle in the back of my neck, the one that comes when your instincts whisper something your mind refuses to hear. I stood up and listened. Nothing. Just the low groan of the mountains settling and the rhythmic slap of water against the concrete ramp. The fire crackled behind me. I told myself it was an echo, maybe someone calling their kid on the opposite shore. My brain needed an explanation, any explanation, to stitch over the sudden tear of fear. Still, I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard faint movement near the lake, the sound of footsteps dragging through wet gravel, a quiet tapping against the RV's side panel. Once, I even thought I saw a light flicker across the water, pale blue, hovering just above the surface before fading into fog. By morning, I told myself it was exhaustion. I'd been driving all day, running on caffeine and old country radio. It's funny how quickly the human mind rewrites fear into logic. The lake was calm again, glassy and bright under a thin strip of sunlight that had broken through the clouds. I felt foolish for being so jumpy. I walked down to the ramp with my coffee and crouched at the edge of the water. The lake was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that bites through skin. Beneath the surface, I could see pale shapes drifting. Just rocks, I thought, though one looked like the outline of a hand. When I blinked, it was gone. Later that afternoon, I met one of the other campers, a woman named Carla, probably mid-50s, wiry, with the kind of eyes that look permanently alert. She came by while I was working on my generator, said she'd been camping here every autumn for over 10 years. I asked if she ever heard strange noises at night. She paused a little too long before answering. "Sometimes the wind comes through the pass," she said carefully. "Sounds like voices if you're not used to it." I nodded, pretending to believe her. But when she turned to go, she added something under her breath that I almost didn't catch. "Don't answer it if it calls you." That night, the whisper came again. It was later than before, closer to midnight. I'd been reading inside the RV when I heard the faint scrape of something outside, gravel shifting under slow footsteps. The hairs on my arms stood straight up. I turned off the light, my reflection vanishing from the window, and peered out into the darkness. Nothing. Just mist rolling off the lake. The moon was a thin shard behind clouds, barely enough to see by. I waited, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then, from somewhere near the water's edge, Eli. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was closer this time, right outside, and it wasn't just a whisper. It was layered, as if 2 or 3 voices had spoken my name at once, overlapping slightly out of sync. I grabbed my flashlight and swung open the door. The beam cut through fog, slicing across the gravel and down toward the water. The sound stopped. The lake was still. But something had changed, something I couldn't name. The air felt heavier, pressed down by silence. I stepped out, barefoot, the ground cold and slick beneath me. My breath came out in short bursts of steam. I shone the light over the ramp, over the water, wet until the beam caught movement. A ripple spreading outward from the center of the lake, as if something had just submerged. That was enough for me. I backed up, slammed the RV door shut, locked it twice. For hours I sat in the dark, listening. No more whispers, no more footsteps, just the lake breathing slow and steady beyond the thin walls. By dawn, I'd almost convinced myself I imagined it. But when I went outside the next morning, I saw something that froze me where I stood. There at the edge of the concrete ramp were bare footprints, small, child-sized, leading out of the water and stopping halfway up the slope. The first prints were clear, pressed deep into the wet surface, but the higher they went, the fainter they became, until they vanished completely, as if whoever or whatever it was had simply dissolved into air. And that's when I noticed the smell. Not rot, not algae. It was something sharper, sweet, metallic, almost like copper mixed with rain. It clung to the air and coated the back of my throat. I stood there breathing it in, feeling something stir in my chest. It wasn't fear exactly, it was recognition, like I'd smelled it before, somewhere long ago on the night my brother drowned. I hadn't thought about him in years. Nathan, 2 years younger than me. We'd grown up fishing off the docks behind our dad's cabin in Idaho. I was 15 when it happened. He was 13. He slipped into the river one afternoon while we were pulling in the lines, and the current took him. We found his hat tangled in the reeds 2 miles downstream. They never recovered his body. After that, the smell of water, cold, fresh, metallic, always carried something else for me. Guilt. A memory half buried under years of pretending to move on. Standing there on the ramp beside Lake Diablo with that same copper scent curling in the air, it was like the past had woken up. And the worst part was the feeling that something in the lake knew it. I tried to shake it off. I packed up early that morning, told myself I'd head farther north, maybe find another site closer to Marble Mount. But when I started the RV, the engine sputtered once, then died. I checked the battery, the fuel line, the starter. Everything looked fine. I tried again. Nothing but a hollow click. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like the lake was waiting for me to give up. By noon, I'd burned through half a tank running diagnostics and muttering curses under my breath. That's when Carla came by again. She stood a few yards back, arms folded, her old flannel jacket hanging loose off her shoulders. "Won't start?" she asked. "Nope. Dead," I said. "You wouldn't happen to have jumper cables, would you?" She shook her head slowly. "You might as well wait till morning. Things don't like to work right up here after dark." I laughed, though it came out hollow. "Things?" Carla's gaze drifted toward the lake. "There's something under it. Always has been. The old locals say the valley wasn't meant to hold water. They dammed it anyway, flooded a few towns, left the graveyards down there. Sometimes when the wind's right, you can still hear them." She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't. Then she turned and walked off before I could ask anything else. That night, I stayed inside the RV, locked the door, drew the curtains, left the small lamp on even after I went to bed. I tried to read, but the words blurred together. Around midnight, I started to hear a faint rhythmic sound, tap, 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 coming from somewhere near the front of the vehicle. It was too steady to be branches, too light to be footsteps. It sounded like someone drumming their fingers on the hood. I sat up, my chest tightening. Then came the whisper again, just outside the door. "Eli." This time it didn't sound far away or muffled. It was right there, inches from the metal. I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen, listening. A long pause followed, and then, clear as breath, "Why did you let me drown?" Every nerve in my body went still. It wasn't the same warped, waterlogged tone as before. This was Nathan's voice, younger, softer, trembling. I wanted to tell myself it was impossible, that it was a dream, a trick of exhaustion. But the sound of his voice, I hadn't heard it since the day they pulled his hat from the reeds. I reached for the handle of the RV door, but stopped halfway. I don't know what held me back. Fear, maybe, or something deeper. The realization that opening that door would mean accepting it was real. I sat like that for what felt like hours, my hand hovering over the latch until finally the whisper faded. The tapping stopped. The silence came back, heavier than before. When I stepped outside at dawn, my breath caught. The gravel around my RV was covered in small, wet footprints again. Not just one set this time, several. They circled the vehicle, overlapping, stopping just short of the steps. Each print was perfect, down to the curve of a heel and the faint smudge of toes, as if pressed by a living person. But what truly froze me wasn't the footprints. It was the writing. Someone had traced words across the fogged window on the driver's side with a finger dragged through condensation. The letters were uneven, trembling. "Come back to the water." My stomach twisted. I wiped the glass with my sleeve, but the message didn't vanish completely. It smeared, clinging like oil. I backed away, my pulse pounding. I didn't care if the RV wouldn't start anymore. I grabbed my keys and tried again. This time, the engine turned over instantly, like it had been waiting for me to give in. I threw the gear into drive and peeled out of there, gravel spitting from the tires. But halfway up the dirt road, something strange happened. The fog grew so thick it swallowed the world. I could barely see the headlights cutting through it. The forest blurred into shifting shadows. Every turn looked the same, every tree identical to the last. Then the GPS on my dash flickered to life, even though I hadn't had service since I'd arrived. The screen glowed blue, displaying a single direction arrow pointing backward, toward the lake. I shut it off. Seconds later, it turned back on again. Return to lake. The words pulsed once, then vanished. The RV's lights dimmed for a moment, as if something had drawn power from them, then brightened again. That was the moment I realized something out there didn't just want me gone. It wanted me back. When I finally broke through the fog, I expected to find the highway. Instead, the road ended abruptly at the lake's edge, the same ramp I'd left hours earlier. The same tire tracks, the same footprints. I hadn't turned around. The road itself had looped me back. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. The water was perfectly still again, mirroring the mountains and the pale dawn sky. And in that reflection, I saw movement. A shape standing on the shore beside the RV. It was me, or something that looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same posture, same outline. But its reflection didn't line up with mine. When I raised my hand, it didn't. When I stepped back, it leaned forward, closer to the surface of the water. Then it smiled. The reflection's mouth moved, slow and deliberate, though the real me hadn't spoken. The sound came next, muffled like from beneath the lake, echoing through my skull. "He's still waiting for you, Eli." I stumbled back from the shore, tripping over the ramp's edge. My reflection broke apart in the ripples, and the voice dissolved into the sound of wind. When I looked again, the reflection was gone, just my own pale face staring back at me. That's when I saw Carla standing a few yards away, watching. She looked older somehow, eyes darker, her expression hollow. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said almost gently, "He's not the first one to call you. The lake remembers everyone who ever drowned in it. It keeps their names. Sometimes it tries to give them back." Her words hit like stones dropped into deep water, slow, sinking, impossible to pull out once they're gone. I stared at her, trying to understand. "Give them back?" I asked. Carla's eyes drifted toward the lake, her breath coming out as a thin wisp in the cold. "It pulls from what's left of them. Their voices, their faces, their memories. Sometimes it finds someone who belongs to that memory and calls them close. It doesn't want to hurt you, Eli. It just wants company." The way she said it made me feel like she'd seen this happen before. Like she knew exactly how it went, step by step, until whoever the lake called finally gave in. I asked her how many people had gone missing out here. She hesitated, then said quietly, "More than they ever reported. Some leave their tents, their boots, even their trucks still running. But they never leave the lake. The rangers pretend it's bad weather or accidents, but people around here know." "Why do you keep coming back?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, a small, broken smile. "Because my husband's down there." I didn't know what to say. She turned and started walking away, disappearing into the fog that was creeping down from the trees. I stood there long after she was gone, the cold sinking into my bones, the words "my husband's down there" echoing in my head. I told myself I needed to leave immediately. I didn't care about the fog, the broken road, or whatever the GPS wanted. I wasn't spending another night there. I packed everything fast: cords, dishes, gear, moving with that manic energy that only fear can give you. But when I turned to grab the last item, my breath caught. There, on the table inside the RV, was a wet handprint. Small, child-sized. Water was dripping from the edge of the counter to the floor, forming a thin trail that led straight to the door. I followed it with my eyes, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. The handprint looked fresh, the water still shining in the morning light. I stepped closer. The air smelled like the lake again, copper, algae, and rain. I reached out to touch the print, and when my fingers brushed the moisture, I heard it. A faint humming, like someone singing through water. A tune I hadn't heard since I was a kid, Nathan's song, the one he used to hum whenever we fished together. I stumbled backward, hitting the door. My hand found the latch, but before I could open it, something outside knocked. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocks came again, harder this time, shaking the door on its hinges. Then beneath the sound, a voice, soft, pleading, broken. "Eli, open the door. It's me." I wanted to run, but part of me, some deep grieving part, wanted to believe it. I pressed my forehead against the cold metal, whispering, "You're not real. You're not real." The voice came again, quieter now, choked by the sound of water. "You left me." That broke me. I yanked the door open. Fog poured in like smoke. For a second, I couldn't see anything. Then a small shape began to form at the edge of the mist. A boy, maybe 12 or 13, standing barefoot on the gravel. His skin was pale, almost gray, his clothes heavy and dripping, his eyes were wide, dark, and hollow, but I knew that face. "Nathan." He didn't answer, just looked at me with that same pleading expression. Then, slowly, he reached out his hand. Water dripped from his fingers, each drop hitting the gravel with a sound too sharp, too heavy, like it carried more weight than it should have. "Come back," he whispered. It's cold down there. I don't want to be alone. I don't know what held me back. Maybe instinct, maybe the faint shimmer of wrongness that hung in the air around him. The fog behind him wasn't just fog. It moved, breathed like something alive. Shapes shifted within it, human outlines rippling and dissolving in silence. I took a step back, shaking my head. You're not him. The boy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Water poured from it instead, spilling down his chin and soaking into the dirt. His eyes rolled white. The air filled with that same humming again, louder now, surrounding me, pressing against my skull like static. Then, in the blur of movement, the boy lunged. He didn't touch me, not exactly, but the cold that hit my chest when he reached me was like being dropped into ice. I fell backward into the RV, gasping, clawing for air. My vision dimmed around the edges, and in that moment, I swear I felt something pulling. Not my body, but my mind, my memories, dragging them toward the sound of water. I screamed. The sound snapped something. The boy vanished. The fog receded just enough for me to slam the door shut again. I sat there for what felt like hours, shivering violently. My skin was damp, my breath shaking. Every few seconds, I'd glance at the window, this half expecting that pale face to appear again. It never did. But I could still hear faint ripples outside, like someone pacing back and forth in the shallows. By afternoon, I knew I couldn't stay. I waited until the light broke through again, then started the RV. This time, it roared to life without hesitation. I drove out fast, the gravel spraying behind me, the road twisting upward through the pass. The fog thinned as I climbed. For the first time in days, I felt the warmth of sunlight on my face. When I finally reached the ranger station at the highway, I pulled over. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I went inside, trying to act calm, but I must have looked half crazed. The ranger on duty, a younger guy with kind eyes, offered me water and asked if I was okay. "There's something wrong with that lake," I said. "Something alive in it." He nodded slowly, like he'd heard it before. "You're not the first to say that." He opened a drawer, pulled out a worn binder, and flipped it open. "You camped near the southern ramp, didn't you?" I nodded. He turned the binder around. Inside were photos, faded, old, cars, tents, empty campsites, missing person reports going back decades. But one photo near the top froze my blood cold. It was of Carla. Her hair was darker, her face younger, but there was no mistaking it. The report was dated 1989. The note beneath said presumed drowned, body not recovered. The ranger must have seen the color drain from my face. "She was a local," he said softly. "Used to come here every year with her husband until one winter they both disappeared. People still see her sometimes, always near the South Shore." I couldn't speak. My hands shook as I closed the binder. The air in the small station felt suddenly too tight, too shallow. I walked out without another word, got back in the RV, and sat there staring at the lake shimmering far below the valley, half covered in fog again. It wasn't over. I could feel it. The pull, faint but steady, like a current running beneath my ribs. Something down there still knew my name. I drove for hours that night, long after the sky turned black and the road became nothing more than a narrow thread between walls of trees. I told myself I was heading east, anywhere but back toward Lake Diablo, but every turn felt wrong. The GPS refused to connect, and the road markers were scarce. By the time exhaustion forced me to pull over, I was somewhere deep in the Cascades, miles from any town. I parked in a clearing off the road and sat there, listening to the RV engine tick as it cooled. My hands still trembled. I could taste copper in the air again, faint but unmistakable. Maybe it was just the memory clinging to me. Or maybe the lake had followed somehow, carried in the condensation on my clothes, in the smell inside the RV. I tried not to think about it. I brewed coffee, opened the small window above the sink, and stared out at the trees. The forest was dense, dark trunks rising into blackness, the kind of night where the line between branches and sky vanished. Somewhere out there, an owl called. The sound should have been comforting, but it only reminded me of that first night by the lake. I told myself I'd leave at dawn. Just sleep a few hours, get some distance. But sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the water again. Black, endless, whispering, and Nathan's face floating just beneath the surface. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it again. Faint. Far away. Eli. I sat up fast, my pulse pounding. The voice didn't sound like it came from outside. It came from within the RV itself. I turned off every light and listened. The air was still. Then, another whisper, closer now. You can't leave. I spun toward the source. The sound came from the small sink, the drain. I stepped closer, my feet bare against the cold metal floor. A faint gurgling rose up from the pipes, like someone whispering through water. Then the drain began to tremble, and water shaking in the basin, even though nothing was running. I shut the tap tight, but the water kept quivering. My reflection rippled across the surface, and then changed. It wasn't me anymore. It was Nathan. His face surfaced in the reflection, pale and slack, his eyes open and milky, lips moving beneath the water's skin. I stumbled back, slamming into the counter. The sound of rushing water filled the RV, as though every pipe had come alive. The lights flickered, then cut out completely. I could hear the walls creaking, expanding, the smell of damp earth filling the air. I shouted, "What do you want from me?" The voice answered, not from the drain this time, but from everywhere. Inside my head, outside the walls, layered with the hum of water running deep underground. You left me. You looked away. My knees gave out. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voice wasn't sound anymore. It was pressure, a vibration that rattled through my chest and spine. "I was just a kid," I screamed. "I couldn't save you." For a second, everything went still. The RV was silent again. Then softly, a child's voice, almost a whisper. "Then come try again." The walls shuddered, and water began to seep through the seams along the floor. It pooled around my feet, icy cold, rising faster than it should have. I scrambled for the door, but when I yanked it open, fog poured in, a thick, blue-gray wall of mist that swallowed everything beyond it. And somewhere inside that fog, I heard it, the sound of rippling water. Lake Diablo. I don't know how it was possible. I'd driven miles, crossed ridges, left it behind, but somehow it had found me again. The fog wasn't fog. It was the lake reaching for me, reclaiming what it had lost. The water inside the RV kept rising. I grabbed my jacket, flashlight, and bolted out into the fog. My boots splashed against unseen puddles that grew deeper with each step. The ground tilted, as if I were walking downhill. The smell of copper filled my lungs. When the mist finally thinned, I saw it. The lake spread out before me, calm as glass, reflecting the outline of mountains I shouldn't have been anywhere near. The same ramp, the same shoreline, the same pale footprints leading into the water. The fog parted farther down the shore, and there he was. Nathan, standing knee-deep in the water, staring at me. Behind him, the surface rippled, faint lights flickering beneath it, like reflections of stars in the depths. I don't remember walking toward him, but suddenly I was. Every rational part of me screamed to stop, to turn around, but there was something else, something magnetic, pulling from inside my chest. Each step into the water felt heavier, colder, as if the lake itself resisted and welcomed me all at once. "Nathan," I whispered, my voice cracking, "I'm sorry." He didn't answer, just looked up at me, his eyes reflecting those pale lights. When I reached him, he raised his hand again, palm dripping, waiting for me to take it. I hesitated, the surface trembling between us. Then, for a moment, I saw his expression shift, fear, not invitation. "Don't," he said, his voice echoing like it came from miles below. "It's not me." And before I could react, something surged upward from beneath the water. It was a hand, gray, bloated, long-fingered, clamping around my wrist with impossible strength. The surface exploded into movement as dozens of shapes emerged, all pale and translucent, faces stretched in silent screams. They weren't reflections. They were the drowned, the ones the lake had kept. I fought, pulling against the grip, but the hand dragged me down to my knees. The water surged around my chest, freezing, heavy. I could hear them all whispering now. Hundreds of voices layered together, some pleading, some calling, some laughing in broken tones. "Let me go," I shouted, thrashing. "Let him go." Nathan reached for me, trying to pull my other arm free, his face twisted, struggling, his voice desperate. "It wants to keep you too." With one final surge, I yanked upward, breaking free just as the hand slipped back into the dark. I stumbled backward onto the ramp, coughing, my vision swimming. The water calmed instantly, the surface sealing over as if nothing had happened. Nathan was gone. Only ripples remained. I lay there for a long time, staring up at the sky, gasping for air. Dawn was breaking again, faint light touching the mountain peaks. The fog was already receding, and for the first time I understood what Carla, or whatever she was, had meant. The lake doesn't take you all at once. It calls you, piece by piece, until the part that's left no longer remembers how to leave. I drove until the fuel light came on, and then I kept driving. By the time I reached civilization again, the world felt wrong, too dry, too loud, too bright. But that night, as I lay in a motel bed, I could still hear the faint sound of rippling water coming from the bathroom pipes. And when I closed my eyes, I saw the lake again, flat and endless, and a single figure standing at its edge, waiting. Nathan. His lips moved, barely visible, the same way they had before the surface closed over him. I couldn't hear the words this time, but I knew what he was saying. He was telling me I'd be back. I've learned over the years that silence on the road doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's the silence that warns you. It's what settles in after the laughter stops, after the fire dies low, and even the crickets seem to forget their song. That's when I start listening, not to the wind, not to the trees, but to the things people tell me when they've been out there too long, when something follows them back from the dark. My name's Eli Vaughn, 46 years old. I've been camping across the U.S. since I was 21, mostly in my old Volkswagen Westphalia that rattles like it's held together by ghosts of road trips past. I used to think the only real dangers were weather, wildlife, or the occasional drifter at a truck stop. But lately, the stories that reach me, stories from listeners of my channel, people like you, have begun to carry the same tremor in the voice, something that doesn't come from imagination or coincidence. They call it coincidence because it's easier than saying something's out there. But I've seen patterns. People vanish. Campsites go cold mid-dinner. Tents rip open from the inside. Radios hum with names no one should know. And every time I read a new message in my inbox that starts with, "You won't believe what happened at our campground," I already know I will. One story in particular came from a woman named Nora, who wrote to me after listening to my video on the Everglades vanishings. Her tone wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was quiet, like someone trying not to wake something that might still be listening. Open quote, "Eli," she wrote, "My husband and I used to camp at a private RV park just off Highway 93 in Arizona. We loved it because no one else ever seemed to stay more than one night. Now I think I know why. We heard things out there, voices, but not just outside, inside the RV," close quote. When I called her later, her voice trembled but never cracked. She told me how, on the second night, she woke up to her husband sitting upright in bed, breathing fast. The air conditioner wasn't running. The desert heat pressed against the glass. And then the voice. It wasn't coming from the door. It wasn't outside the window. It was speaking softly through the vents. Open quote, "You shouldn't stay another night," it whispered. Close quote. I could hear the sound in her retelling, the way her husband leaned close trying to locate the source, and how it followed his ear as he moved along the wall. The voice was calm. Not threatening, not screaming, just knowing. Like whoever it belonged to had already been inside long before they arrived. She said they left before sunrise, but as they drove away, their GPS rerouted back to the same park. Every road, every turn, led them back. The same gas station clerk nodded at them twice, as if seeing them again in the same hour. When she finally reached home in Prescott, her husband played back their dash cam footage. The strange thing, it never showed them leaving. The footage cut from night to dawn, and they were still parked there, engine running, eyes fixed forward. That part haunted me the most, because a week later I got another email, this time from a man named Ray, who said he'd stayed at an empty park off Highway 93, where a couple had abandoned their rig. He found the place eerily quiet, a coffee mug still half full, 2 chairs out by the fire pit, no tire tracks leaving, just drag marks, long and uneven, leading toward the highway ditch. I don't know what chills me more, that he found their campsite, or that he said he heard something whisper through his vents that night too. Only this time, it said his name. I used to think listeners exaggerated. Fear does strange things to a tired mind on the road. But lately, the overlap between stories, those little impossible details that match, is what keeps me awake. The voices in the vents, the looping roads, the sense that someone or something rides the air currents through your vents and waits for your breath to sync with its own. Sometimes late at night in my Volkswagen, I switch off the fans just to listen. And when I do, I can almost hear them, tiny pops in the ductwork like someone inhaling. I tell myself it's heat expansion. I tell myself that. But sometimes I swear I hear a word shape itself between the clicks. One night last winter, after reading Nora's story aloud for a podcast episode, I parked just outside Joshua Tree to clear my head. The wind there never stops. It scrapes and hums through the rocks like sandpaper over bone. Around 2 a.m., I woke to my van shuddering slightly. Thought it was the wind at first. Then the radio flicked on by itself, the volume low, static whispering through. Open quote, Eli. Close quote, I froze. The voice was female. Not robotic, not distorted. Familiar. It was Nora. I shut off the radio, but the static kept hissing through the speakers even after I pulled the fuse. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped the flashlight. When I finally yanked open the side door, the desert air rushed in dry and heavy. And across the dirt lot, about 50 feet away, I saw another Volkswagen. Same model, same color, same broken rear light. Only mine was the only one supposed to be there. I remember walking toward it in slow steps, every crunch of gravel loud in my ears. The other van's headlights were off, but the cabin light glowed faintly behind the curtains. I could hear faint music inside, some old folk song playing on loop. And just as I reached the door, the engine started. But the tires didn't move. The engine ran loud, then quiet, then a whisper of a voice came through the open driver window. Open quote, you shouldn't stay another night. Close quote, I ran. And not because of what I saw, but because of what I felt. A presence behind me that didn't move like footsteps, but like air, rushing against my neck in perfect rhythm with my breathing. When I made it back to my van, the clock on the dash flickered from 2:14 to 2:14, again and again like the second never finished. The air vents rattled, the whisper returned. Open quote, leave it running. Close quote. So I did. I drove through the night until the horizon bled orange and my eyes burned. The next morning, I found I'd circled the same gas station 3 times without realizing it. Each time I passed, the attendant waved with the same slow motion, the same half smile that never reached his eyes. When I finally stopped for coffee, I checked the map. My GPS said Highway 93, same one from Nora's story. I don't know how I ended up there. I'd meant to head west, but every road seems to lead back to where the stories began. And I think whatever travels through those vents, whatever whispers your name, it doesn't stay in one place. It rides with us. It listens when we tell our stories aloud, maybe even through the microphone I'm speaking into right now. Because if you've ever heard your name in static or felt your camper breathe when there's no wind outside, then maybe you've already met it. There's a rhythm to paranoia that only long nights in the wilderness can teach you. It starts as a whisper, a little tremor in the air, then grows into something you can feel beneath your skin. That next morning, parked off Highway 93, I could barely bring myself to step outside. The desert sun burned white over the gravel, heat rising in waves like the ground itself was breathing. I told myself I'd imagined the other van, that I'd been too tired to see clearly. But when I turned the ignition to check the time, my stereo hummed to life again. Static. And beneath it, a faint melody. The same folk song I'd heard drifting from that second Volkswagen. It wasn't coming from the radio station. It was playing from my own cassette deck, a deck that hadn't worked in years. That was when I started recording everything: voice memos, mileage logs, even temperature readings. Anything that could help me prove later that I wasn't losing my mind. I drove north toward Nevada, windows cracked, refusing to use the air vents. I figured if the whispers could travel through air systems, I'd take away their path. By the time I reached Tonopah, I was half delirious from the heat. I stopped at a rundown RV park behind a shuttered diner, a gravel lot lined with sagging awnings, no office, no other rigs in sight. I should have kept going. But exhaustion is the most convincing liar there is. I parked, shut off the engine, and stepped out. The silence hit me like a wall. No birds, no wind, just the hollow hum of the desert itself. I took a slow walk around, my boots sinking into soft dust. It looked like the place hadn't been used in years. And yet, there were fresh tire marks, deep and wide, the kind that only come from something heavy. They led right past my van and ended abruptly behind an empty lot space. There was nothing parked there, just 2 folding chairs side by side and an ashtray filled with burnt matchsticks. I turned back toward my van, uneasy. My reflection shimmered faintly in the windshield, except for one detail that made my stomach twist. My reflection was moving a half second out of sync. You ever have a moment where your body wants to bolt, but your brain locks you in place, trying to make sense of what you're seeing? That's what it felt like. The reflection tilted its head a moment after I did, like it was remembering the motion instead of performing it. Then, just for a flash, I saw someone else behind my mirrored self, a shape leaning forward from the driver's seat, staring right through me. When I blinked, it was gone. That night, the air felt heavy inside the van. I tried to sleep with the window cracked, but every time I drifted off, the faint click of the vents made me jolt awake. It wasn't mechanical. It was deliberate. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, like someone drumming fingers in thought. I turned off every fan, sealed the vents with duct tape, and lay there in silence. Still, the sound continued, like it didn't care about barriers. The air smelled faintly metallic, the way old blood smells after it dries in the sun. Somewhere between wakefulness and dream, I heard the static again. Not from the radio this time, but from my voice recorder. It had switched on by itself, red light blinking in the dark. I reached for it, my fingers shaking, and hit playback. My own voice filled the cabin. Open quote, March 8th, 2:13 a.m., RV park outside Tonopah, heat 98 degrees. No sign of close quote. Then it stopped. A long pause, static. And then, layered under my breath, another voice whispered, open quote, leave it running, close quote. Exactly the same words as before. I dropped the recorder. My pulse slammed in my ears. The smell in the van thickened, sharp and sweet like ozone. And then I heard something impossible, a faint rasping breath from beneath the floorboards. The van rocked slightly, once, twice, then stilled. Every instinct screamed to start the engine, but I couldn't move. I stared at the base of the kitchenette where the sound had come from. The tiny screws on the cabinet seemed to tremble, the metal faintly ringing. I crawled out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, and lowered myself onto the vinyl floor. My heart hammered so hard it drowned out everything else. The light beam trembled over the vents near the rear wheel well. Dust clung to the grill. But behind it, movement. A shadow, barely visible, shifting with shallow rhythm, like lungs expanding and contracting. I froze. Then it stopped breathing when I did. That's when I realized it wasn't alive. It was listening. I backed away slowly, whispering to myself, "You're tired, Ely. You're tired." But the thing beneath the floor whispered it back, my exact words, perfectly mirrored, same pitch, same tremor. My throat went dry. I reached for the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then silence. From the corner of my eye, the passenger seat belt buckled itself with a faint click. That was enough. I grabbed my bag, kicked the door open, and ran into the desert. The heat slammed into me, dry and suffocating. I stumbled past the rows of empty lots, each with its own pair of folding chairs facing east, as if the missing campers had been waiting for sunrise that never came. Behind me, the Volkswagen's headlights flicked on by themselves. The horn honked once. Short, sharp, almost human in tone. Then again, longer. And then the radio started playing that same folk song. The sound followed me into the dark like a pulse. When I finally turned around, breath burning in my chest, the van was gone. Not moved. Gone. No tire marks. No lights. Just the desert stretching out smooth and untouched. The silence was worse than the noise. It felt like the world had taken one long breath and hadn't let it out yet. I walked until my legs gave out, collapsed near an old fence line, and waited for morning. When the first light broke, I saw dust trails in the distance, something moving slow, heavy. The shape of my van coasting along the dirt road without me inside. And perched in the driver's seat, through the glare of the sun, I thought I saw someone watching me, someone with my same posture, my same hat, my same face. Then the van turned the corner and disappeared. I didn't chase it. I didn't even stand. I just sat there until the air cooled and the shadows stretched long enough to swallow the tire tracks. Later that evening, a local rancher found me walking barefoot along the road. He said I looked like I hadn't slept in days. When I asked what time it was, he told me about 2:14. I laughed. I couldn't help it. That number had followed me like a curse. He gave me a ride into town, and as we drove, I noticed the old AM radio in his truck was broken, wires cut clean. I asked him why. He said, because sometimes when the static gets too quiet, it starts talking back. I stayed in Tonopah for 3 days, holed up in a small roadside motel that smelled of bleach and desert dust. The owner, a wiry man with a cowboy hat and yellowed fingernails, handed me the keys with a look that said he'd seen worse. I wanted to ask him if he'd ever lost time, if his clocks ever froze at 2:14, but I couldn't bring myself to hear the answer. At night, the motel was too quiet. My room's air conditioner rattled, its vents coughing warm air that smelled faintly metallic, and I had to keep turning the knob off and on just to convince myself it was working. But even then, every now and then, the hum of the machine would dip low and murmur like a half-formed word. On the third night, I opened my laptop and checked the email drafts in my outbox. There were 6 of them, all addressed to unknown recipients. Each one was just a single sentence. Open quote, "You shouldn't stay another night." Close quote. I didn't write them. At least I don't remember writing them. That was when I realized the voices weren't coming to me anymore. They were moving through me. I'd become the signal. I shut the laptop, stuffed everything I owned into my duffel, and headed out before dawn. The sky was bruised purple, the desert wind thick with dust. As I passed the diner, I saw something glinting behind the broken glass of the open 24 hours sign, a reflection of my van's headlights blinking in rhythm with my pulse, except my van was still missing. When I hit the highway, I called Nora again. No answer. Then I tried her husband's number. Disconnected. The last number I dialed was one of my listeners, a man from Oregon who'd emailed a story months ago about hearing a breath from the drain pipe while camping in Crater Lake. He picked up on the first ring. His voice was shaking. "Eli, have you been talking to yourself on the radio? What do you mean? There's a broadcast running on AM 104.3. It's just your voice. You're reading people's stories, the same ones from your videos, but they sound different. The tape loops. Every time it restarts, your voice sounds more wrong." I turned up my truck's old radio and spun the dial until the static thinned into something coherent. At first, it was faint, just wind distortion. Then I heard it, my own voice. Open quote, "You shouldn't stay another night." Close quote. Then again, louder. Open quote, "You shouldn't stay another night." Close quote. The signal wavered, blending with a low hum that felt less like a sound and more like a vibration beneath the ribs. My reflection in the rearview began to flicker under the dim light of dawn. The road ahead blurred at the edges. Open quote, "Eli." Close quote. The voice wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was from the vents again, those same old ducts in the dashboard. I slapped them shut. The air whistled through anyway. Open quote, "You tell their stories," it said. "Now you carry them." Close quote. The steering wheel turned stiff as if something else gripped it. I yanked at it, but the van kept rolling straight down a road that didn't exist on the map. No signs, no lines, just pale dirt stretching into an endless horizon, and then the engine died. Silence, the kind that rings. Outside, the desert light had shifted. The sun wasn't rising anymore. It was hanging, frozen, low and red on the horizon like a blood clot in the sky. I opened the door and stepped out, expecting heat, but the air was cold. Breath misted in front of me, curling into faint shapes that looked almost human before fading. My own footprints sank deep into the sand, but behind me they began to fill in as if the ground were swallowing them whole. A few yards ahead sat an RV, old, beige, dust-caked, the one I'd seen before. My reflection's van, its headlights blinked twice, then held steady. The driver's door swung open. Someone stepped out. It was me, or the part of me that the static had stolen. The face was mine, but stretched thin, pale like wax left in the sun. When it spoke, the words were my own, layered and hollow. Open quote, "You tell them what you've heard, Eli, but you never tell them what listens back." Close quote. I backed away, tripping over the uneven ground. My other self smiled without warmth, leaned against the van, and tilted its head toward the radio inside. From where I stood, I could still hear the static, only this time, hundreds of voices tangled in it. Crying, begging, some calling my name. Nora's was among them. Open quote, "Please stop telling it where we are." Close quote. That's when I understood. Every story I'd read, every name I'd said aloud, it wasn't warning me. It was tracking them. Using my voice, my videos, my microphones as beacons, each upload was a pulse through the static, leading it closer. It didn't want listeners. It wanted doors. And I'd opened dozens. I fell to my knees, the weight of it pressing through me like cold water. My other self crouched beside me, smile widening. Open quote, "You thought you were documenting fear," it whispered, "but fear documents you." Close quote. I lunged at it, but my hands passed straight through, like smoke through glass. The moment I touched it, every sound vanished, the wind, the static, the hum. The world blinked to black. When I came to, I was sitting in my van again, parked outside the same diner in Tonopah. My watch read 2:14. The fuel gauge was full. And on the passenger seat sat a stack of printed emails, all from my listeners. Each one open to the same line. Open quote, "You shouldn't stay another night." Close quote. My camera light was on. The mic was hot. It was recording. I don't remember pressing record. Now, as I speak, the vents hum low and steady, whispering with that faint breath again. I could stop. I could turn off the mic. I could break the pattern before it finds someone else. But I think that's not how this works anymore. Because if you're hearing this, if you've made it this far, then you're already part of the recording. You're already listening from inside the same current of air that carries it. And maybe when you close your laptop tonight or shut down your phone, you'll hear it too. The gentle hiss of your vent or the soft static before your speaker cuts out. Listen closely. If it says your name, don't answer. If it whispers mine, don't repeat it. Just leave it running. Static swells. The breath syncs with yours. The story ends where it began, in silence that isn't really silent at all. I remember the first time I saw Mount Shasta. It wasn't the peak that drew me in. It was the silence, the kind that swallows the sound of your own breath and replaces it with something older, heavier. I'd been driving north from Redding in my old Volkswagen Westphalia, the one I'd rebuilt from the ground up after my divorce. That van was my escape pod. Steel, chipped paint, and second chances. I'd taken it across Utah, slept by cold rivers in Idaho, chased storms through Wyoming. But Shasta was different. It didn't just look at you. It studied you. I'd planned only 2 nights. The campground sat at the base of the mountain, tucked behind a stand of firs that moved like shadows when the wind shifted. There weren't many people there that weekend. A retired couple in an RV, a pair of hikers from Oregon, and me. It was late September, and the air already carried that brittle edge of coming winter. When I pulled in, the ranger at the entrance, an older man with sun-creased eyes, gave me a look that lasted a little too long. "Camping alone?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just me and the van." He nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Keep your radio off after dark," he said quietly. "The mountain doesn't like to be called to." I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to add a little local mystery. But that night, I'd start to understand what he meant. The first few hours were perfect. I set up a small fire, cooked some beans and eggs on the little propane stove, and watched the last light fade off the snowline. The mountain's shadow stretched across the trees, long and blue. The air was sharp and clear, no noise except the occasional creak of the trees and the soft crackle of my fire. When the stars came out, they looked too close, as if the sky had tilted just enough to make the heavens hang lower. I remember lying on the van's fold-out bed, my hand resting on the frame, feeling the cool metal vibrate with the faint hum of the earth. I thought it was my imagination, just the residual rumble of the road. But around midnight, the vibration changed. It wasn't constant anymore. It came in slow, deliberate pulses, like a heartbeat. A deep thrum I could feel more than hear. I sat up, listening. The air had gone completely still. Even the crickets had stopped. And then, from somewhere up the slope, I heard a low groan. Not quite thunder, not quite wind. It rolled through the ground, up through my van's tires, and into my chest. The mountain, I thought, is breathing. I stepped outside, barefoot on the cold dirt. The moonlight was pale and colorless, washing the trees into silver silhouettes. I turned off my flashlight and just listened. Somewhere beyond the tree line, something was moving. A slow, dragging sound, like stone sliding against stone. I froze. My first instinct was to rationalize it, a rock fall maybe, or a bear moving through the brush, but it didn't sound like either. It came in intervals, deliberate and slow. It would move, stop, and then breathe. The pulse under my feet matched it. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Fear fades fast in daylight, especially when the world looks ordinary again. The mountain gleamed white against a cloudless sky. The firs whispered gently in the wind, and my van looked small and harmless in the morning sun. A woman named Clara, the hiker from Oregon, came over while I was making coffee. She had a bright scarf and the kind of easy confidence that comes from years on the trail. "Did you hear the mountain last night?" she asked casually, stirring sugar into her mug. I hesitated. "You mean the wind?" She smiled faintly. "Sure, the wind." Later, we hiked up one of the lower trails together. She said she'd been coming here every fall since her father died, that he used to tell her the mountain was alive. "Alive how?" I asked. "He believed there's something under it," she said, stepping over a root. "Something ancient, older than the rock itself. He called it the sleeping god." She glanced at me, maybe expecting me to laugh. I didn't. The higher we climbed, the quieter it got. By midday, even the birds were gone. We stopped by a clearing that overlooked a dry stream bed filled with smooth stones. Clara knelt, brushing her fingers over the dirt. "Feel that?" she asked. At first I didn't. Then as I crouched beside her, I realized the ground was vibrating. A faint, rhythmic pulse like something miles below was turning in its sleep. I looked at her. "What is that?" She didn't answer. She just stood and started walking back down. That evening, when the sun fell behind the ridge, I tried to leave. Something in my gut told me not to spend another night there. But when I turned the key, my van wouldn't start. The engine clicked once, twice, dead. I checked the battery. Perfectly fine. I stayed up by the fire again, drinking coffee to keep myself awake. Every so often, I thought I heard that slow, dragging sound again, closer this time. I turned my flashlight toward the woods, but the beam barely cut through the mist. Then came the whisper. Soft, low, and wet, like someone speaking through a mouthful of dirt. "Go back." It was close enough that I could feel the breath of it on my ear. I spun around, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing. Just trees. I backed up toward the van, my heart hammering, and then I saw the stones. Small river stones, the kind from the dry creek we'd passed earlier, were arranged in a line along the edge of my campfire. Perfectly spaced. I hadn't noticed them before. I was certain they hadn't been there. Each one was damp, as if freshly pulled from the earth. I kicked them away, angry more than scared. I thought maybe Clara was playing some twisted joke. But when I turned toward her campsite across the clearing, the space was empty. Her tent was gone. Only a shallow depression in the grass remained, and beside it, a spiral of stones leading back into the trees. By the third night, I was losing the thread of what was real and what wasn't. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of stone corridors beneath the mountain, long, curved tunnels that pulsed like veins. In the dreams, I was crawling through them barefoot, and each time I touched the walls, they moved beneath my hands, slow and alive. I woke with dirt under my fingernails. Around dawn, I heard the sound of an engine. A truck rolled up near the ranger's post, and I ran toward it. The ranger, the same man from my first night, stepped out, looking at me like he'd already expected I'd come. "You heard it," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "What is it?" He sighed. "Some people say it's tectonic movement. Others say it's something that was here before we were. The tribes called it the god that sleeps below. They said if you wake it, it remembers you." He told me to pack up and go, that my van would start now. I didn't even ask how he knew. When I turned the key, the engine roared to life. I drove until the mountain disappeared in my rearview mirror. Only then did I realize I was still hearing it. The pulse. Not through the ground this time, but through the van itself, humming in rhythm with the engine. It's been months since then. I've camped in deserts, by lakes, under stars that never move. But sometimes, when I pull off the road and kill the ignition, the silence returns. Thick, alive, waiting. And under it all, faint but steady, I can still feel that pulse, like the mountain never let me go, like something beneath the stone still remembers my name. I tried to convince myself it was just trauma, that maybe my nerves were fried after what happened at Shasta, but the truth was harder to reason away. Every few nights, when I camped in the van, even hundreds of miles from that mountain, I'd wake up to that same low vibration. It was faint, sometimes almost imperceptible, but it was there, a rhythm under the surface of things, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. It got to the point where I started keeping a log, times, locations, what I felt, what I heard. The first night it happened after I left Shasta. I was parked outside a small campground near Crater Lake. I felt it through the floor of the van around 2:14 a.m. It lasted less than 5 minutes. Then it stopped, as if someone had lifted their hand off the surface of the world. By the third entry, I stopped writing times. It didn't seem to matter. The pulse didn't care about the hour, the place, or the distance. It came when it wanted. Always unexpected, always steady. Sometimes I'd hear whispers just before it started. Not words, not in any language I could name, just texture, like the sound of sand moving through stone. It would fill the space between waking and sleep until I couldn't tell which world I was in. And then one night in Oregon, I heard Clara's voice again. It was faint at first, carried on the hum of the van's engine as I idled near a logging road. I thought maybe I was losing it. Sleep deprivation, stress. But then it got clearer. "Why did you leave?" I killed the engine and stepped out. The forest was pitch black, wet with mist. I could see my breath, thick as smoke. "Clara?" I called out. My voice sounded strange, like it didn't belong to me. No response. Only that low pulse through the ground again, slow and deep. The fog shifted and I saw movement between the trees. A figure, small and distant, standing perfectly still. Her scarf, bright red even in the low light. "Clara!" I shouted, taking a step forward. But as soon as my boot hit the dirt, the vibration stopped. And so did she. She didn't move or blink. She just tilted her head, like she was listening to something beneath her. The forest went dead silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. Then slowly, she lifted her arm and pointed toward the base of the mountain, or at least the direction where I knew it was. The pulse came back. It was so strong it knocked the air from my lungs. I fell to my knees, hands pressed into the soil, and for a split second, I swear I felt breath rise up from the ground. Hot and wet, like something massive had exhaled below me. When I looked up again, she was gone. I got back in the van and drove all night. No map, no destination. Just highways and fog, the yellow lines running like veins through the darkness. At some point, exhaustion took over and I pulled off near a rest stop outside Klamath Falls. I killed the engine, leaned back, and told myself to stop thinking about it. That's when I noticed something new. The rear window, the one I always kept clean, had streaks running down the inside of the glass. Thin, uneven marks, like something had dragged wet fingers through condensation. But the weird part was the pattern. It wasn't random. The lines curved and intersected, forming a spiral. The same shape I'd seen in the stones around my fire that night at Shasta. For a long time, I just stared at it, my breath fogging the air. Then I wiped it away with my sleeve and forced myself to sleep. When morning came, the spiral was back. I drove straight to a mechanic that day, convinced maybe there was some sort of vibration in the van, something mechanical that was creating these sensations. The guy, an old-timer with grease up to his elbows, ran every test he could think of. "Your rig's solid," he said finally, wiping his hands. "No rattle, no current leak, no weird harmonics. If you're feeling something, it ain't coming from this van." That should have been comforting. It wasn't. For the next week, I drove south, Nevada, then into Eastern California, the desert stretching out like a great blank page. I thought maybe distance would fix it. But that night, parked near a salt flat under a cold full moon, I woke again. Not to the pulse this time, to the sound of someone knocking from beneath the van. 3 slow, deliberate taps, then silence. My body locked up. I could feel the vibration coming up through the floor, rising in perfect rhythm with my heartbeat. Then, faintly, a whisper, "It's not finished." I bolted out of the van barefoot, stumbling into the cold desert night. The air felt thinner out there, metallic. I shined my flashlight under the chassis. Nothing. The sand was untouched, but the ground, it moved, just barely, but enough that the beam of light trembled in my hand. I dropped to my knees and pressed my palm flat against it. It was warm and pulsing. I sat there for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into my bones while the earth beat softly beneath me, slow and patient. Then, just as the first light began to break over the ridge, it stopped again, like it had gone back to sleep. That morning, I found another spiral drawn into the dust on my back window. Smaller this time, tighter, like whatever was doing it was getting closer. A month later, I met someone who gave me a name for it. Her name was Mara, a retired geologist who lived out of a camper near the Modoc Plateau. I met her when I stopped for gas in a town so small it didn't even have a name on the map. She saw the van, the camping gear, and we started talking. I told her cautiously about the vibrations, about Mount Shasta. She didn't laugh. She just stared into her coffee and said, "You felt it, didn't you? The pulse." I nodded slowly. She took a long breath. "You're not the first. You won't be the last." Mara told me she'd been studying seismic anomalies around the Shasta region for 30 years. Tiny, consistent vibrations that didn't match any known fault line. They weren't earthquakes. They were too regular, too deliberate. They call it the pulse beneath the stone. She said quietly, "It's not just movement. It's memory." I asked what that meant. She hesitated. "When you stand too close, when you listen too long, it listens back." I felt my stomach twist. "You mean it." "Remembers," she said, cutting me off. "And once it remembers you, it wants you back." She told me something else before I left, something I still can't forget. "When the earth breathes again," she said, "don't run from it. Running only wakes it faster." I didn't understand what she meant until the next night. I camped near an old lava bed, miles from anyone. The stars were out again, cruelly bright, and the air so still it hurt my ears. Around midnight, the pulse returned, stronger than ever. It came in deep waves, each one shaking the ground until pebbles began to dance around my campfire. The van's metal frame hummed. My coffee mug tipped over. The air grew hot, too hot. Then I heard it, a sound rising from below, a long, low moan that carried the weight of something impossibly old. The ground split open not 10 feet from me, a crack racing across the dirt like lightning. And in that hollow from deep within came a light. Not bright, not harsh, just a dim, steady glow, pulsing in rhythm with that heartbeat. I should have run. Every part of me screamed too, but I remembered Mara's words. Don't run. So I stood there, frozen as the light flickered once, twice, and then stilled. The ground sealed itself as quietly as it had opened. When the vibration faded, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was empty, calm, like something had looked at me, weighed me, and decided to let me go. But when I got back in the van, I found something sitting on the passenger seat, a single river stone. Damp, perfectly smooth, and carved into it, that spiral. I kept that stone for weeks, tucked inside the glove compartment like a secret I didn't want to admit existed. Sometimes when the road was quiet and the sky stretched out wide and dark above me, I'd take it out and just hold it. It always felt warm, not like it had absorbed heat from the sun, but like it was alive in some quiet, steady way, a heartbeat that had slowed but never stopped. The more miles I put between me and Shasta, the stronger that feeling became. Not fear, not anymore, something deeper, harder to name. It was like I had been tethered to something beneath the surface, and every highway I followed only tightened the line. I thought, maybe if I went far enough, I could break it. So I drove south until the air turned to dust and the land flattened out into the Mojave. No trees, no rivers, no hum beneath the soil. Just the dry hiss of wind and the sound of my tires grinding through the gravel. I parked near an abandoned gas station, miles from the nearest town. The windows were smashed out, the roof caved in. I wanted isolation, complete silence. I needed to know if the mountain's pulse could follow me here. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat outside the van, staring up at the stars, waiting for something to happen. But the world stayed still. The ground beneath me felt dead, hollow. For a while, I believed maybe it was finally over, until the radio turned on by itself. It was just static at first, soft, whispering like wind rushing through stone tunnels. Then the sound shifted. Underneath the static, a low, rhythmic thud began to rise. Slow, even, patient, a pulse. I reached for the dial to turn it off, but the moment my fingers touched it, the signal cleared. "Do you remember me?" It was Clara's voice. I froze. My mouth went dry. "Clara?" I whispered. "Where are you?" Static. Then her voice again, broken, faint, coming from somewhere impossibly far away. Below. The pulse grew louder, rolling through the speakers like thunder. I slammed the radio off, but the sound didn't stop. It just moved, down into the earth, up through the van's tires, into my chest. I dropped to my knees outside, pressing my palms against the desert floor. And there it was again. The same warmth, the same deep, living rhythm. It wasn't Shasta anymore. It was everywhere. That's when I realized it had never been about the mountain. It had always been about what slept beneath it. I remembered what the ranger had said. The mountain doesn't like to be called to. Maybe I hadn't called to it. Maybe it had called to me. I stayed on my knees, breathing shallowly as the sound swelled. Then, faintly from somewhere beneath the surface, I heard movement. A grinding, slow and deliberate, like enormous stones shifting in the dark. The vibration intensified until the dirt trembled under my hands. And then, silence. When I stood, my legs were shaking. My headlights flickered twice and died. The desert went black. The stars above seemed to fade, swallowed by a rising shadow that had no shape, no form, only presence. It filled the horizon, not seen but felt, pressing down on me with an ancient gravity that made my ribs ache. And in that moment, I understood the truth. What people had called gods weren't creatures or spirits. They were memories buried deep in the planet, sleeping in stone and pressure and time. And some memories, if you stir them enough, begin to dream again. When the light finally returned, faint, pale, unreal, I was lying on my back beside the van. The sky was still dark, but dawn was coming. Everything was exactly as it had been. The gas station ruins, the sand, the still air, except for the footprints. They started at the van door and led out across the desert, long, deep impressions, as if someone had walked barefoot through the dust. Each print pulsed faintly with light, the glow of something beneath the skin of the earth. I followed them, step by step, until they ended at a flat stretch of stone half buried in sand. In the center of that slab was a spiral, carved so deep it looked bottomless. I didn't dare touch it, but I could feel it calling, a vibration that reached up through the soles of my feet, up my spine, into my jaw. It wasn't sound. It was memory. The same voice that had whispered in my ear that first night at Shasta came again, closer now, clearer. Not all who wake remember who they were. Then silence. I drove until sunrise, chasing daylight like it could save me. But the van wasn't the same anymore. The engine still ran, but the sound had changed. Beneath the hum of combustion, I could hear another tone, low, droning, patient. The heartbeat, hidden in metal and motion. I tried to play music to drown it out. Didn't work. I tried sleeping in motels, far from campgrounds, far from dirt. But even through concrete floors, I could feel it, the faint, rhythmic tremor. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw that spiral. Not carved in stone, not drawn in dust, but inside my eyelids, bright and turning. Weeks passed. I stopped seeing people. I stopped calling friends. Every word felt heavy, every silence full. The van became my whole world, a capsule, a moving tomb. The stone stayed in the glove box. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Then, one night on the outskirts of Death Valley, I saw her again. Clara. She was standing by the edge of the road, lit by the van's high beams. Her scarf was gone, her hair matted, her eyes dark and distant. She didn't move as I slowed to a stop. "Clara?" I shouted through the window. She tilted her head again, that same inhuman slowness I'd seen before. Then she smiled, small, sorrowful. "You shouldn't have come this far," she said. Her voice wasn't hers anymore. It had depth, like two people speaking through one mouth. "It's awake now." My throat went dry. "What is?" She stepped closer. The light caught her face, and I saw it, the faint pulse beneath her skin, the rhythm of something buried deep, glowing through her veins. "The sleeping god," she said softly. "It remembers you." I reversed the van, tires spinning, gravel kicking up behind me. She didn't move, just watched. Her mouth opened slightly, and I swear the sound that came out wasn't human. It was the pulse itself, a vibration that made the mirrors tremble and my heart skip a beat. I didn't stop driving until I hit Los Angeles. Even here, surrounded by noise, by light, by millions of people, I can still feel it. In the ground, in the walls, in me. I don't know what the mountain truly is. Maybe it's alive. Maybe it's dreaming. Or maybe it's the planet remembering what came before us, before fire, before names. All I know is this. When you camp near Shasta and the ground starts to hum, don't listen too closely. Don't try to understand it. Don't touch the stones, because if you do, it will know your rhythm. It will learn your heartbeat. And once it remembers you, it never forgets. Even now, when I park the van and kill the engine, there's a few seconds of silence before the world catches up. And in that space, faint but steady, I still feel it, the pulse beneath the stone, the sleeping god still breathing. They say the Oregon coast is beautiful year-round, gray mornings that stretch into silver afternoons, waves rolling like the slow breath of something ancient and alive. But beauty out here comes with silence, and silence can make a man hear things he's not ready for. My name's Caleb Morrow. I'm 47, born inland near Eugene, and I've been living out of my RV for almost 3 years now. After losing my job and my marriage within the same season, the road started calling to me. Softly at first, then like a voice I already knew. I told myself I was chasing freedom, but sometimes I wonder if freedom isn't just a polite word for running away from ghosts. Last winter, I decided to spend 2 months exploring the lesser-known camping spots along the Oregon coast, places that didn't make the glossy brochures or the influencer videos. I wasn't after tourist trails or lighthouse tours. I wanted quiet. Those tucked-away turnouts where the ocean sounds closer than it should be, where the fog rolls in so thick you can't tell where the sky ends and the cliffs begin. The first strange thing happened near Heseda Head, a place most folks know for its famous lighthouse. But I wasn't near the main beach. I was further south, down a narrow, half-forgotten road that barely deserved the name. The GPS didn't list the site. It was just a gravel loop with a wooden post that said Camp 9. The paint was chipped. No one else was around. I parked by the tree line. The air smelled of seaweed and wet pine, that sweet, sour perfume that only the Pacific Northwest can conjure. I'd driven 8 hours that day and didn't feel like setting up much, so I just folded down the bed, cracked the window for air, and listened. That's when I heard the first sound, something between a whistle and a low hum. It didn't come from the ocean. It came from behind me, from the forest. At first, I thought it was the wind moving through the tall sitkas, but the pattern wasn't natural. 3 tones, pause, 2 tones, then silence. It went on for about 10 minutes, repeating every few minutes until the fog thickened. I could almost feel the air pressing against the RV walls, heavy and damp, like the world outside was holding its breath. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks. I've camped long enough to know that forests can mimic almost anything. A broken branch, a warped whistle, even the cadence of human breath. But there was something intentional about it, like someone or something was trying to figure out if I'd answer. That night, the dream came. I was standing outside the RV, barefoot in the wet moss, looking up at the cliffs. The lighthouse beam wasn't sweeping over the ocean like it should. It was pointing straight inland, cutting through the forest like a blade. I remember thinking, that's wrong. It's not supposed to do that. Then I heard a voice behind me whisper, "It's looking for you." When I woke, the window over the sink was cracked open wider than I'd left it. My socks were wet. Over the next week, I tried a few more camps along the coast, places that locals mentioned only in passing. 10 Mile Creek, Baker Beach, a dirt pullout near Florence that didn't even have a name. Each spot had its own quiet personality, but all shared the same feeling, like being watched from the edge of the fog. At Baker Beach, my firewood refused to stay lit. 3 times, the flames went out without warning, even though there was no wind. When I leaned in to relight it, the smoke swirled back into my face, thick and choking, forming loops that seemed deliberate. The shapes reminded me of numbers, 4, 1, then 9. The date didn't mean anything to me, but I wrote it down anyway. On my 5th night, I stopped at a place called China Creek, south of Bandon. It wasn't much, a narrow trail to a beach, a few picnic tables, and an old wooden bridge that looked ready to give up. Locals warned about high tides, but that wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was the way my reflection in the RV window didn't always move in sync when I looked out. Once, I turned my head and saw my reflection still staring forward, eyes wide and unblinking. I laughed it off then. Fatigue, salt haze, maybe even dehydration. But when you're living alone on the road, there's a fine line between imagination and insanity, and you don't always notice when you cross it. That night, the whistling returned. Same pattern, 3 tones, pause, 2 tones. But now there was something underneath it, like words submerged in static. I grabbed my phone to record, but the moment I hit record, the sound stopped. Complete silence. Even the ocean had gone still. That was the first time I truly felt dread. Not fear, not nerves. Dread. The kind that sinks into your bones, the kind that whispers, "You've been noticed." I sat there in the driver's seat, staring at the dark outline of the forest. I kept expecting a flashlight beam to swing through the trees, or maybe a pair of headlights. Nothing came. Just that dense fog creeping closer, swallowing the last bits of moonlight. At 2 a.m., I heard a knock on the RV door. 3 slow knocks, then 1, then silence. I froze. My mind tried to rationalize, maybe a branch had fallen, maybe it was an animal, but deep down something primal screamed that it wasn't. The pattern wasn't random. It was a rhythm, the same rhythm as the whistle. I wanted to look through the window, but I couldn't. My body refused to move. So I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, listening as the fog pressed against the glass. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a darker shape within the gray, like something standing right at the edge of visibility. When I finally managed to move, I flicked on the high beams. The fog lit up like smoke, and for a heartbeat, I swore I saw footprints leading away, bare, human, and wet. The next morning, everything looked normal. The air smelled like salt and pine again. The footprints were gone. I thought about leaving, but something stubborn in me refused. I'd come out here to face myself, to prove that I could still live without fear or routine. Running would mean admitting that I'd lost control of that. Instead, I moved south past Port Orford until I found a little spot near Arizona Beach State Park. There was no one there, just driftwood, crows, and endless fog. The sign by the trailhead had a small metal tag hammered into it, Site 419. My breath caught. The same number I'd seen in the smoke. I laughed, an empty, nervous sound. Maybe it was coincidence. But in my gut, I felt something shift. That night, I made the mistake of stepping outside after midnight. The fog was alive, moving in patterns, not just drifting. I could hear the ocean, but it sounded closer, like it had crept up behind me. And in that moment, I realized that the thing I'd been hearing wasn't the wind or the sea. It was breathing. It came from the cliffs, long, deliberate breaths echoing through the stone like the coastline itself was asleep and dreaming. And when the breath stopped, I heard my name. I didn't run right away. You'd think hearing your name whispered by the sea would make you grab your keys and floor it, but fear does strange things to a man. It slows him down, makes him question what he's hearing, what's real, what isn't. I stood there in the fog, the name, my name, rippling through the air like it was woven into the sound of the surf. Caleb. Long, drawn out, gentle, almost kind, like it was trying to comfort me. The ocean wind cut through my jacket, damp and salt-heavy, and I felt this irrational pull to walk toward it. My flashlight beam hit only mist, scattering light like smoke. But in the distance, I thought I saw lanterns, warm yellow orbs hanging low like someone had built a fire on the sand. It was too far to make out details, but I could swear they flickered with movement. I should have stayed put. I should have shut the door, turned on the stove, brewed coffee, done anything normal. But I've never been good at ignoring curiosity. I walked toward the light. The sand was soft, sucking at my boots, each step muffled by fog. The air had this strange vibration to it, like standing near a subwoofer. I could feel it in my chest, deep and rhythmic. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't the waves. It was steady, deliberate. By the time I reached the shoreline, the lights were gone. Nothing but gray sea and black rock. The tide was pulling out, leaving glistening patterns that looked almost like footprints, but too large, too far apart. And then behind me, I heard it again. The three tones. Pause. Two tones. Except this time it wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming from beneath the sand. I froze. My flashlight trembled in my hand. A bubble of dark water rose from the wet ground and burst, releasing a smell so foul it made me gag, like rot and seaweed and something older, something buried. I stumbled backward, tripping over driftwood, and the fog swallowed everything. When I made it back to the RV, my hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock the door. Inside, the air was stifling, like someone had been breathing in there for hours without opening a window. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shapes forming in the fog outside. Faces pressing against the glass, the outlines of hands leaving faint condensation streaks that faded before I could look directly at them. By morning, I'd convinced myself I'd imagined it. Exhaustion can do that. Warp sounds, twist reflections, stretch your sense of time. I told myself I'd drive inland for a while, but before leaving, I wanted to check something. There's a small historical marker near Arizona Beach that talks about the coastal tunnels. In the early 1900s, fishermen claimed there were natural caves connecting sections of the shore, some said to run miles under the cliffs. Locals used them during storms, but after several disappearances, the entrances were sealed. The last recorded one? Site 419. I stared at the rusted sign, feeling that same pulse from the night before thrumming under my boots. Maybe it was just waves hitting rock, but deep down, I knew the ocean wasn't the only thing moving beneath me. I headed north again, trying to convince myself to go home, or at least to a real campground. Somewhere with people, lights, laughter. But the thing about fear is it feeds on isolation, yet it also traps you in it. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left too quickly, whatever had noticed me might follow. I stopped in a small town called Langlois, just a diner and a gas station, really. The waitress, an older woman with a sun-leathered face and a tired smile, asked how long I'd been on the road. When I told her I'd been camping along the coast, she raised an eyebrow. "You don't want to stay out there too long this time of year," she said, refilling my coffee. "Why's that?" I asked. "Fog rolls in thick. Sometimes folks see lights and follow them, never come back." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "You mean ghost stories?" She didn't smile. "I mean the kind that don't end up in the papers." Her words stuck with me as I drove north toward Cape Blanco, Oregon's westernmost point. The road twisted through spruce forests that seemed to lean closer with every turn. By the time I reached the overlook, the fog was back, thick and shimmering. It moved like it had a pulse. I parked at a lookout that faced the ocean. My radio flickered between static and faint voices, none clear enough to make sense of. I left it on low volume. It felt less lonely that way. Just after dusk, something tapped on the RV roof. Soft, rhythmic, like rain, but too consistent. I turned off the radio, held my breath. The tapping stopped. Then, from the driver's side window, a faint knock. 1, 2, pause, 3. The same sequence. I didn't look right away. My pulse hammered in my neck. Slowly, I turned my head, and through the condensation, I saw a shadow. Tall, thin, unmoving. Too still to be a person. It stayed there for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, the shadow leaned closer to the glass until its outline blurred. I heard that same whisper again, muffled through the metal. "Caleb?" Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the ignition and twisted hard. The engine coughed, stalled, then roared to life. My headlights cut through the fog, and the shadow was gone. I drove. Didn't matter where, just away. Away from the cliffs, from the sound, from the smell of wet rot that still clung to my clothes. I don't remember how long I drove. Maybe hours. The fog followed, thicker than ever. I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but turning back wasn't an option. When I finally stopped, it was because the road ended. A dead end overlooking another stretch of beach I didn't recognize. No signs, no tracks, just ocean and silence. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, the headlights painting the mist in pale yellow. I told myself I'd wait until dawn, then find my way back. But dawn never came. The clock on the dashboard froze at 3:17 a.m. My phone battery drained from 60% to 0 in seconds. Outside, the fog glowed faintly, as if lit from within, and through it, shapes began to move. At first, they looked like waves rolling in slow motion, but then I realized they were figures, dozens of them, maybe more, half seen in the mist. They walked in uneven steps like moving through water, their faces pale and wet. Some looked familiar, campers I'd passed earlier in the trip, hikers I'd seen at rest stops. Their mouths moved, but no sound came. Only that same tone, 3 notes, pause, 2. One of them raised a hand, pointing straight at my RV. Then they all stopped moving at once. I don't know why, but I turned off my headlights. I sat there in total darkness, listening. For a moment, nothing. Then, from beneath the RV came that slow, wet breathing again. Steady, deliberate, close enough to feel through the floor. That's when I realized it hadn't been following me. I'd been parked above it all along. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel like it was an anchor, keeping me tethered to reality. The breathing under the RV had rhythm. Slow, deep, and wet, like the ocean inhaling through gills. Sometimes it paused, like whoever or whatever was down there was listening, waiting for me to react. I thought about gunning the engine, but my instincts screamed not to. Every sound seemed amplified. The ticking of the cooling metal, the faint hiss of fog brushing against the windows, my own heartbeat drumming through the silence. The world had shrunk down to the size of that RV. When I finally managed to look out the window, the shapes were gone. The fog hung heavy, motionless now. I could still smell salt, but it was stronger, almost metallic, like blood diluted in seawater. I glanced down at the floor, at the thin gap of light between the baseboard and the door. A small shadow moved there, sliding from one end to the other like a hand feeling for a way in. Something inside me broke. I grabbed my flashlight, opened the door, and stepped out barefoot into the freezing air. The sand was slick and black under the beam. The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was nothing, just the ocean murmuring somewhere beyond the fog. Then, slowly, I crouched and looked beneath the RV. Nothing, just darkness. I was about to stand when I saw the outline of a hole no bigger than a basketball, carved perfectly into the sand. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. The edges were smooth, circular. I leaned closer, shining the light in. The beam didn't reach the bottom. It just disappeared, swallowed by the same color as the ocean on a moonless night. Then the smell hit me. Rot, salt, and something like wet iron. My stomach twisted. I stumbled backward, tripping into the sand. The ground shifted under me, not like a landslide or quake, more like it breathed. The sand rose and fell in slow waves, pulsing out from the hole. I dropped the flashlight and it rolled toward the opening, beam spinning wildly. For a split second, the light caught something, a glint of pale skin deep below, and the curve of something that looked disturbingly like a human shoulder, rising and falling with the movement. That was enough. I scrambled back into the RV, slammed the door, locked it, and started the engine. This time, I didn't care what was outside. I didn't care where the road went. I just drove. The wheels spat sand and salt water as I tore down the narrow road, fog whipping past like smoke. The headlights barely cut through, but I could see enough to follow the faint white lines. Every turn felt like I was looping back to where I'd started. I kept passing the same mile marker, 419. It didn't make sense. I'd been heading north, but the GPS map had stopped updating 20 minutes ago. Just a frozen blue arrow spinning in place. I tried the radio. Static. I tried the phone. Dead. That's when I saw it. Something on the side of the road, just ahead. A small figure standing in the fog. I hit the brakes. The RV skidded, fishtailed, stopped just short of the shape. My headlights revealed a man, soaked, barefoot, wearing a faded yellow rain jacket. His face was pale, almost translucent like the skin of a fish pulled from the deep. He didn't move. He just stared at me. I rolled down the window an inch. "You okay, man? You need help?" His mouth opened, but no words came. Only a low hum, 3 tones. Pause. 2 tones. I threw the RV into reverse, tires spinning, heart pounding. The man didn't chase me. He just tilted his head like a curious animal, and as the fog thickened around him, I realized I could see straight through his outline. By the time I reached the main highway, the fog started to thin. Dawn finally broke, a thin line of gray and pink stretching across the horizon. I pulled into a turnout and killed the engine. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely hold the thermos of coffee I'd left on the counter. The silence after that night was worse than the noise had been. No birds, no ocean, no wind, just the slow settling creaks of the RV cooling in the morning light. I wanted to believe I'd just cracked under exhaustion, that maybe it had all been a hallucination, a storm of paranoia after too many nights alone. But then I saw the footprints. They trailed from the front of the RV to the edge of the bare feet, long, narrow, and deeply pressed into the mud. I followed them slowly, each step a dare against my own sanity. At the edge, I stopped. Below, the tide crashed against the rocks, white foam spraying into the air. But just beneath the waterline, I could see it, a dark opening carved into the cliff, breathing in rhythm with the waves. It was another tunnel. A gust of wind hit me, carrying the faint smell of salt and something burnt, something like hair. I stepped back, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement in the cave, pale hands reaching just out of the surf, then sinking again. That was when I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. Not anymore. A few days later, I drove inland to a small town near Coos Bay. I found a ranger station, one of those old wood-paneled buildings that look like they've been there since the 60s. Inside, a young ranger named Mara was sorting maps. When I told her I'd been camping near the coast and seen strange things, she gave me that cautious, polite look people give when they're not sure if you're unstable or joking. But when I mentioned Site 419, she froze. She set down her pen, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder so old it looked waterlogged. That site was shut down 20 years ago, she said quietly. Flooding, sinkholes. One ranger went missing during the closure, never found. What was his name? I asked. She hesitated, then showed me the file. The photo was grainy, faded, a man in a yellow rain jacket. His name was Caleb Morrow. I stared at the photo until the letters blurred. Same face, same eyes. I felt something cold and wet bloom in my chest. That's not possible, I whispered. That's my name. Mara's smile faded. Sir, maybe you should sit down. But I didn't. I walked out. The fog had started rolling in again, creeping over the tree line like smoke. The sound of the ocean echoed faintly through the hills, even though we were miles inland. That night, I camped in a rest area just off Highway 101. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing water dripping somewhere inside the RV. I checked every faucet, every pipe, dry. But the sound continued, slow, steady, like the rhythm of breath. I turned on the cabin light, and on the floor under the sink, a dark patch was spreading. Not water, salt water. It shimmered faintly, like moonlight caught in liquid. And then from deep beneath the floorboards, I heard it again. 3 tones. Pause. 2 tones. The same rhythm that started it all. The same pattern that followed me from site to site. Only this time I didn't try to run. I just sat there, whispering to the dark, "What do you want from me?" And in the stillness that followed, the air seemed to breathe back. Home. That word, home, echoed through the RV like it had weight, like sound given shape. It wasn't loud, but it filled every corner, every hollow between the walls. My own voice didn't sound right when I whispered it back. Home. It came out smaller, weaker, like an echo that didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the small table by the window, watching the condensation gather and slide down the glass like veins. The fog outside pulsed faintly with its own rhythm, like it was breathing in sync with me. I started to realize something. The tone sequence, the whistling pattern, the 3 and 2, it wasn't random. It matched the way the waves broke against the cliffs when the tide was full. The coast itself was the instrument. Something beneath it was playing the sea. By dawn, I was shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion and that gnawing need to understand. I'd seen things that didn't make sense, heard voices that knew my name, found evidence of someone who looked like me disappearing years before I was even supposed to exist. I needed answers, so I went back. I told myself I was just checking, proving to my own mind that I hadn't lost it. But the truth? I was drawn back like gravity, like something buried there was waiting for me to dig it up. When I reached the coast again, the fog was already rolling in. It wasn't natural. It moved against the wind, coiling like smoke through the trees. The sign for Arizona Beach had been replaced by a metal barrier. Road closed. Erosion risk. Someone had spray painted over it in black letters. Stay out. I parked anyway. The ocean sounded wrong again. Hollow, like it was echoing from inside a cavern. I followed the trail I remembered, though it looked different now. The sand was darker, heavier, as if the sea had soaked it through with something more than water. When I reached the clearing where I'd parked before, I froze. The RV tracks I'd left in the sand were still there, even though it had rained for days. The footprints, my footprints, still led to the edge of the cliff, and the hole was open again. Bigger this time, wide enough for a person to crawl through. The air rising from it was cold and metallic, thick with the stench of rust and something ancient. I leaned over the edge and shone my flashlight down. The beam reached farther than before, enough to see the slick walls pulsing slightly as though breathing, and deeper still the reflection of water. But it wasn't water. It was moving against gravity, rolling upward along the stone in slow, steady waves. Something inside me whispered, "If you want to know, you have to go down there." It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was compulsion. A call that wasn't mine but felt older than anything human. I tied a rope from the RV's hitch to a boulder and lowered myself in. The air grew colder the deeper I went. My flashlight flickered, the battery draining fast. The walls were wet. covered in something that shimmered like fish scales. My boots splashed into shallow water at the bottom, though I couldn't tell if it was seawater or something else. The tunnel curved, and I followed it. After maybe 20 feet, the ground leveled out into a small chamber. My light fell on something carved into the rock, a spiral etched over and over again as if by dozens of hands. Inside the spiral, names. Hundreds of them. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The last one carved was mine. Not just Caleb Morrow. The date was there too. Today's date. I stumbled back, my foot splashing in the water. Ripples spread outward, and then the sound returned. The whistling, distant but closing in. The air vibrated, the same rhythm pulsing through the walls. I turned to leave, but the tunnel behind me had changed. The rope I'd used was gone. The way out had sealed itself in fog. The light flickered again, then died. In the dark, I heard it, breathing. Not one thing, but many. The kind of slow, wet inhale that fills your lungs before the scream can reach your throat. I could feel it moving closer. Then, a faint glow. I turned, and at the far end of the chamber, a figure stood knee-deep in the water. The same yellow rain jacket, my face. He looked at me the way a reflection does when you realize it's delayed, off by a heartbeat. "You came back," he said, voice low and heavy with something not entirely human. "I needed to know," I whispered. "You already do," he replied. "You always did." He raised his hand, and the water began to rise, crawling up the walls, spilling over the carvings. I backed away, but there was nowhere left to go. The cold wrapped around my ankles, my knees, my chest. My double smiled faintly. "It's time to remember." Then the chamber went black. When I woke, I was in my RV. Morning light filtered through the window. Everything was quiet, the kind of stillness that doesn't belong to nature. My clothes were dry, no sign of mud or water. The dashboard clock read 3:17 a.m. again. I tried to start the engine. It turned over once, then died. The windshield was fogged over from the inside. I wiped it with my sleeve and froze. On the outside of the glass, drawn in perfect spirals, were the same carvings from the tunnel. At the center of the largest spiral, my name. And below it, faintly etched in salt, another word. Home. That was 3 months ago. I've been on the move since, never staying near the coast more than a night. But it doesn't matter how far inland I go. The fog finds me. I'll park by a lake in Montana or a rest stop in Arizona, and one morning there it is, creeping up through the trees, rolling in against the wind. Sometimes at night I hear the whistling again. 3 tones. Pause. 2 tones, always the same. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the window moving a fraction too late. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I dream of the sea breathing through me. I don't think I ever really left that tunnel. Maybe none of us do. Maybe the Oregon coast keeps what it calls home, one camper at a time. If you ever find yourself driving along Highway 101 and the fog starts to glow a little too bright and you hear something calling your name, don't answer. Don't stop. And for God's sake, if you see a sign marked Site 419, keep driving, because I did stop. I did listen. And now the ocean won't forget me. It's waiting for you too.